Good evening. My name is Tracy Craig. I'll be moderating tonight's meeting. This is the Water Board's meeting related to the former Ford Aeronutronics property. We're going to be discussing the draft feasibility study for the Corsica Villa communities. We don't have anyone actually in the audience, but we're going to go ahead and record our presentation so that people can watch it in the comfort of their own homes by accessing our YouTube channel. So just a couple things. First of all, John, thank you. The purpose again of this meeting is to discuss the draft feasibility study, answer any questions and address concerns. On the website, either on GeoTracker, which is the Water Board's website, or we have a project-specific website, there's lots of handouts that people can use and you can read them all right there. And then quickly, I'd just like to introduce our team. We have a small team with us tonight. So first, we have Jessica Law, who is the project manager with the Water Board. I think most people know Jessica, but just in case, Jessica, can you please raise your hand? And then also we have Mike Barnes. Mike Barnes was the old project manager for WSP, Ford's environmental consultant. He went and did something different for a year, and now he is back managing this entire project. So Mike, do you want to just say anything just to welcome people if they're watching this at a later date?
Yeah, just want to thanks for the introduction, Tracy. Happy to be back. Look forward to working with everybody on this project. And that's about it. That's all.
Great. It's good to see you virtually. And then we have Ken Connor, who's a senior vice president with WSP, also a professional engineer. And then last we have we have John Fermani. John and I work together, and John is the technical wizard behind all of this tonight to make it work. Okay. We have a very brief agenda. We've gone through the first part of this, and then Jessica will be discussing the feasibility study and also talking about the remedial action plan, then next steps, and finally we'll open it up for questions and answers. Of note, if we do have anybody that comes in later, I will monitor that, and people, if you'd like to make a comment, all you need to do is unmute yourself. This is pretty informal tonight, and ask the question, or you can raise your virtual hand. And I will go ahead and unmute you and call on you. And then can we go to the next slide, Jen? Great. So Jessica, I think I'm going to hand this over to you now.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Good evening. So we are talking about the draft feasibility study for the Corsica Villas community. And this presentation is going to go over a general recap of the project and kind of how we got to where we are today. Next, we'll talk about the remediation process. Then we're going to go over the remedial action objectives, which are the cleanup goals for this project, followed by the feasibility study, what that is, and kind of the conclusions of that, which would be those remedial alternatives and what remedial alternatives are. And then we will discuss the public comment process, followed by the next steps, and then have our question and answer session. And for those that are watching this recording at a later date, if you have questions afterwards, feel free to contact any one of us on this project team, whether it's myself or Mike Barnes, or contacting that information hotline number. And those will be available at the end of this presentation. So to just provide this recap, the vapor intrusion assessment activities that have been conducted over the last couple of years has collected a sufficient amount of data. And that data was used in the human health risk assessment that was conducted for Corsica Villas for that community. And the conclusions identified that there was the need for some additional investigation just to determine if vapor intrusion was occurring at one property. Based on the data that had been collected so far, it still left a few uncertainties. It wasn't clear if it was an indoor air source or a vapor intrusion. So the next steps would be collecting some more data. And then there is the potential for future risk. And so because of that, the Water Board requested two reports. First is the feasibility study, which we're here to discuss tonight. And then the other one was a work plan to address those to help answer some additional questions, get some more data. And then there is a third report, the long-term indoor air monitoring plan. That was previously submitted, so we didn't request that report, but it is a part of the next steps for this project. And that had been submitted on July 21st, 2021. And that report included long-term indoor air monitoring for Corsica Villas. And then the draft feasibility study was submitted by WSP on behalf of Ford on August 29th of last year. And then we provided our comments on that draft document on March 17th of this year. So before I start talking about this draft feasibility study, I just want to take a quick minute to talk about the remediation process. And we have covered this and I've presented on it in the past, but it's important to understand this process and those timeframes associated with each step. So that first step we have is the site investigation, and that's what's happened over the last kind of 3-4 years. It's been ongoing. It's important because you have to characterize the extent of the contamination before we can get to determining cleanup and stuff like that. That includes the field investigations as well as that risk evaluation, that human health risk assessment report. The next step is that feasibility study, and that takes some time to develop. And that is developing and evaluating these cleanup alternatives and recommending one of those alternatives to implement for the site. So where we're at now would be the public comment period. We will be announcing that proposed remedy, and we want to provide the opportunity for public input. Following the public comment period would be remedial design. And that is where you have the remedy design and ensuring community protection measures. And then the other one component would be securing any necessary permits from the city, county, and other appropriate oversight agencies. And then finally would be remedy implementation. So that would be the safe implementation of that remedy, as well as maintaining and monitoring the remedy. So now we want to just kind of start discussing the draft feasibility study. And again, you'll hear us talk about it and refer to it as an FS, though I'm going to do my best to not use any acronyms because we tend to talk in kind of alphabet soup, if you would. And so I will try to refrain from that. But, you know, just in case when we say FS, we're referring to this draft feasibility study. And it covers the following items, and we're going to go more detailed, but I think it's first important to highlight these 4 kind of main points. So it proposes specific remedial action objectives, and those are the cleanup goals. It also conducts this feasibility study to evaluate all the remedial technologies that are available. It identifies and evaluates remedial alternatives based on that feasibility study, and then it proposes a remedial alternative for water board approval and for public review and comment. And I've kind of thrown out a few big kind of concepts here, and I'm going to go into more detail in these coming slides on that. So first, I think it's important to highlight where the feasibility study covers. So let me just get this laser pointer. It is this hashed area right here, the southern portion of the Corsica Villas community. And that's because that is where the soil vapor and groundwater plume migrate below the ground, is beneath this southern portion. And that is the area that is to be evaluated. That's where it was evaluated for the human health risk assessment. So first, I just want to talk about the proposed remedial action objectives. Again, more acronyms. We'll talk about RAOs, that's the acronym for that, and then what our comments are. But the remedial action objectives are the goals of the cleanup activities, and it addresses each impacted media. And that media would be the groundwater, soil, gas, and indoor air. And these cleanup goals, they can be a numerical value, but they are often descriptive criteria that are protective of human health and the environment. So first we have groundwater. And the main objective is having full delineation, meaning we know the extent of that contamination and wanting to see the contamination in groundwater decreasing over time. Contaminated groundwater, we want to see that it will reach drinking water standards in a reasonable time frame, and we concurred with, the Water Board concurred with that cleanup goal. The next one is for soil, and the environmental screening levels are listed here as the ESLs, have values listed, and those are protective for human health. And so we, the Water Board, agreed with those as the cleanup objectives. Next is soil gas, and the recommendation is site-specific screening levels. And we did comment in our response to the draft feasibility study, requesting that the deeper soil gas, so what's greater than 15 feet below ground, that those impacts are taken into consideration as well as far as those next steps go. But we concurred with the site-specific screening levels because the steps and the additional monitoring that is in place would be protective of human health. And then finally, indoor air, and the recommendation for that would be those environmental screening levels for indoor air for residential. And again, we, the Water Board, concurred with that criteria. So next would be the feasibility study, and the feasibility study evaluates remedial technologies based on the following criteria. It's the ability to implement that remedial technology. Is it going to be effective? And then over the cost as well. And about 20 remedial technologies were evaluated for cleaning up soil, soil gas, groundwater, and indoor air. And of those approximately 20 technologies, 8 were retained as being feasible for implementing for this site. So from there, after that feasibility study, there are potential remedial alternatives that are developed from those retained technologies. And the remedial alternatives are just one or more remedial technologies that are proposed to meet those cleanup goals or those remedial action objectives. And the remedial alternatives that were proposed are as follows. Number one is no action. And I just want to mention that all feasibility studies have a remedial alternative of no action for comparison purposes. Next is alternative 2, and that includes in situ bioremediation of groundwater, which is just simply helping reduce groundwater concentrations by adding amendments to below the ground to treat the groundwater. Also having soil vapor extraction, and then that continued indoor air monitoring. And then the third remedial alternative includes monitored natural attenuation for groundwater and soil vapor, subslab depressurization, and indoor air monitoring. And for the subslab depressurization system, that had a note of as needed for if vapor intrusion is identified, that would be the way to address that. And we're going to go into a little bit more detail on these remedial technologies for what is proposed. But first, these remedial alternatives are compared to the National Contingency Plan's 9 evaluation criteria, which are characterized or categorized into 3 groups. You have the threshold criteria, primary balancing criteria, and the modifying criteria. Now, all of the threshold criteria must be satisfied for a remedial alternative to be considered, and that would be overall protection of human health and the environment, as well as compliance with state and federal requirements. Therefore, alternative 1 of no action tends to get thrown out as an option at this point. Next is the primary balancing criteria, and these 5 criteria are used to weigh the major trade-offs among the alternatives, which include the long-term effectiveness and permanence, reduction of toxicity, mobility, and volume through treatment, short-term effectiveness, implementability, as well as cost. And then finally is the modifying criteria, which addresses the regulatory and public acceptance of these alternatives. And community input and acceptance is especially important and valuable to the Water Board, and it is mentioned in the statute regarding environmental cleanups. So based on the evaluation criteria, alternative 3 is what was recommended in the draft feasibility study for the Water Board approval, and is what is being presented to all of you for public comment. And I'll discuss alternative 3 in more detail on the next slide. But as I had mentioned, that subslab depressurization system would be contingent on vapor intrusion occurring and would be building specific. So the proposed remedy, alternative 3, one of the comments that we did have before I go into the details was we wanted them to include considerations for addressing increasing soil gas concentration trends, if that was to be observed, because that discussion wasn't included in the feasibility study. And since there's always this potential, we want to make sure that is something that is being considered. But the proposed remedy would be this monitored natural attenuation, and that allows the natural ongoing processes to decrease groundwater and soil gas concentration. It is not active remediation, but there is monitoring to ensure those concentrations are decreasing over time. And this would include the installation of additional groundwater monitoring wells and soil gas probes. And I can show those, kind of conceptual locations on the next slide. It also includes the indoor air monitoring, and then that last component would be the subslab depressurization, which is vapor intrusion dependent. And what subslab depressurization does is it creates a negative pressure beneath the foundation so that it can redirect those vapors from below the ground through piping to above the roof line to address that vapor intrusion. And because there's that negative pressure under the foundation, it basically stops any vapors from migrating through that foundation. So here on this figure shows where would be some proposed groundwater monitoring wells, as well as proposed soil vapor probes. And these orange circles right here would be the proposed groundwater monitoring wells. There are 3 of them, one here, up here, and then over right in here. And then the yellow triangles would be some recommended additional soil vapor probes to get a better understanding of the soil vapor plume below the buildings within this area. So finally, we have the public comment period, which allows an opportunity for public input on the proposed remedy prior to finalizing the draft feasibility study. In our comment letter, the final feasibility study is due to the Water Board 45 days following the end of the public comment period. And that public comment period is from May 22nd through June 21st, 2023. And comments, if we have any additional folks now, can be taken during the last 15 minutes of this meeting right now as we are live. But otherwise, you can submit comments in writing to either myself and at my email address, which is jessica.law@waterboards.ca.gov, or you can mail them to me at 3737 Main Street, Suite 500 in Riverside, California, 92501. Again, I do want to mention that your comments and acceptance of the remedy is especially important and valuable to the Water Board. So the next steps would include finalizing the feasibility study. And if we receive any comments, we would also prepare a responsiveness summary. That summary would be sent out to anyone who submitted comments and will be attached to the final feasibility study. Once that's submitted to the Water Board, we will review and approve that. Next would be preparing the remedial action plan, which really would be including the work plans and those details for implementing that proposed remedial alternative number 3. They would submit that again to the Water Board for our review and approval. And then once that's approved, is the permitting process. If there is the need for subslab depressurization before implementing that, there does need to be a pilot test, which is just a small scale evaluation of it so that the system can be designed appropriately to ensure it is effectively addressing and mitigating that vapor intrusion, and then having that long-term monitoring. So for additional information, you can go to GeoTracker. There is the LIRIS list email, which is the Water Board's email notification subscription. And a lot of times that's what we use to let you know of the next community-wide public meetings. There is the Water Board webpage. Board has their site-specific website and 800 number, which is 833-949-7363, I believe.
3673.
3673, there we go. And then there's the local information repository at the local library there by the Civic Center. And so that would conclude the presentation portion of the feasibility study. And if we've had anyone join, we can answer any questions. And if nobody has joined, as you finish watching this recording, please feel free to reach out to any one of us with any questions you may have.
Great. And so there hasn't been anybody that's joined us, but people might watch this. John, can you just put it back to the public comment slide one more time? There's how to provide comments until June 21st. And we're always available to answer questions. And I think that will conclude our presentation for tonight. Thank you so much. Great job, Jessica. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Good night.